The U.S. Department of State Bureau of Nonproliferation leads U.S. efforts in one of the highest foreign policy and national security priorities: to prevent the spread of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, and their missile delivery systems, to secure nuclear materials in the states of the former Soviet Union, and to promote nuclear safety and the protection of nuclear materials worldwide. It also promotes responsibility, transparency, and restraint in international transfers of conventional arms and sensitive dual use for commercial and military technology. The Export Control and Related Border Security Assistance Program, or EXBS, is the United States government's premier initiative to help other countries improve their export control systems. Managed by the Office of Export Control Cooperation, the EXBS program partners with other governments to prevent proliferation.
The EXBS program is brilliant at one thing it does really well, which is to increase people's awareness. So in other words, people are beginning to understand what the problem is when they didn't perhaps know what it was before.
Weapons of mass destruction proliferation and technical know-how is becoming an increasingly larger problem, undermining the world's peace and stability. In recent years, terrorist attacks have been bolder and more destructive than ever before. Evidence of terrorists pursuing nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, and the revelations about the extensive networks of shady proliferators, scientists, businessmen, and arms brokers have demonstrated the very real threat posed by the proliferation of these deadly technologies. These terrorists and proliferators are becoming ever more sophisticated.
They're rich. They can acquire materials and expertise because they have money. There are a lot of changes in the last 5 years in that there's almost a terrorism industry now where there is a supply and demand. So you have terrorist groups who wouldn't normally talk to each other now colluding and helping each other out.
Responsible governments all over the world have identified this danger and are taking steps to counter it.
I think we'll necessarily have to reflect the reorientation of many of our foreign and security policy goals. What we're already seeing is a greater focus on the risk of terrorism. We clearly have, over the last few years, seen a greater awareness of the risks of WMD proliferation.
But as governments step up their efforts, proliferators are becoming more sophisticated. They are finding new targets. Currently, countries that are not the world's principal producers are finding themselves at risk. These countries may have important transshipment hubs or transit routes. They may produce dual-use goods, items that have legitimate commercial applications, but in the wrong hands could also be used to build weapons of mass destruction or missile delivery systems. Export controls are on the front line of U.S. efforts to combat the proliferation threat. On September 23, 2003, President Bush called on all members of the UN General Assembly to criminalize WMD proliferation, to act.
Weapons of mass destruction, to enact strict export controls consistent with international standards, and to secure any and all sensitive materials within their own borders. The United States stands ready to help any nation draft these new laws and to assist in their enforcement.
One of the highest priorities of U.S. foreign policy has been the control and interdiction of weapons of mass destruction proliferation. The Export Control and Related Border Security Program is probably the U.S. government's premier program for assisting countries to develop export control systems that meet international standards, both in licensing of the products that they produce, in reaching out to industries in their country that produce those products and making them aware of the use of dual-use technologies in the development of weapons of mass destruction, and in building effective enforcement mechanisms within their country and at the borders to control transit of weapons of mass destruction technologies and materials.
The EXBS program is implemented by experts from the private sector and by other United States agencies, the Departments of Commerce, Energy, and Homeland Security, which includes the U.S. Coast Guard and U.S. Customs Service. The EXBS program draws on this expertise to help other governments understand how proliferators work and how to prevent them from succeeding.
That's an understanding of where these people are moving and what they're doing and who they're talking to. It's an understanding of where their money is going, and that's becoming less easy because they're using clandestine means of funding things. And where the materials are going and coming and where they're exchanging, where commercial companies are being set up as fronts to transfer this equipment. And if you put all that together and look at the way the border control regimes are now increasing in their effectiveness thanks to better surveillance, the use of, for example, X-ray backscatter techniques to probe inside containers, which was not possible to do really before effectively. You're beginning to get more of a signature to the way these materials and people and money are moving. And that gives you a head start then to look at where you think the problem might pop out next.
The EXBS program is active in over 40 countries, from the former Soviet Union to the Middle East to Southeast Asia. The keys to the success of the EXBS program are practical training, equipment that it provides, and the implementation of the export control process.
The EXBS program, I think, is perceived as probably the most valuable contribution in terms of real help. What I've noticed from my own experience of conducting bilaterals in a number of regions in the world is that political dialogue is important in terms of raising awareness. But what you find most in many of these countries is the desire for practical help and sharing of experience. And I think the real value of the EXBS program is that you've managed to put in place the follow-up, which is very often lacking in some of this dialogue. One other important part of the EXBS program is that it addresses the need for border security and enforcement. One of the key questions we always have with the countries that we engage with is, well, yes, of course you have the legislation in place, but what about enforcement? And I think one of the real advantages of focusing also on border security is that it reinforces export controls and the flow of technology, but it has spin-off benefits as well. And certainly I think in the post-9/11 environment that we're all in, when we are focusing also on terrorism and the movement of people, anything that we can do to reinforce border security obviously has consequential benefits on all of these other areas of terrorism.
So this is really where the rubber hits the road in trying to control the movement of weapons of mass destruction, materials that can be used to create weapons of mass destruction, to control that movement across the borders, transits from supplier states to bad end users.